Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Iridium Axel, and today I'm going to be teaching you how to use the basic functions of Hitfilm Express, my favorite free video editing software. But before we begin, if you hadn't noticed, this video is really long. So for that reason, I've added time codes on screen right now. So if there's a specific part of the video that you need to look for because you're learning how to use Hitfilm and you don't need to see all the rest of this hour video, you can click on it or go to that part right now. So let's get started with how you download and install it. You're going to go to fxhome.com/express. You're going to come right here and hit Get Hitfilm Express Free. That'll pop up this little box for you where you can create an account and then they will send you the download. Along with that download, you'll get installation instructions. While you're installing it, it will ask you whether you want to install the complete all program features, which will take the most hard drive space, the typical, which is what most people end up using, or custom, where you choose your various parts. I would recommend either the custom or the complete, because it's better to have something and not need it than to need something and not have it. So with that being said, and with you now having Hitfilm as your proud software ownerage, let's get into the actual tutorial. All right, so here we are inside of the software. We can see right here on the front page, we have a lot of tutorials made by the folks over at fxhome for how to do pretty specific effects in Hitfilm. Now, these effects are not limited to whatever it is they're showing you how to do. In fact, a lot of them are useful for transitioning to other projects, so I definitely recommend giving them a watch. If we come over here to the side, we have the add-on packs. So we're using Hitfilm Express, not Hitfilm Pro. Hitfilm Express has a lot less effects and stuff than Hitfilm Pro. Now, for the average video maker, this isn't going to be that significant of an issue. There's a lot of stuff in Pro you'll probably never even use, but if there are things that you need from Pro, but you don't necessarily want to pay that $300, there's only like one or two effects you need, you can buy individual packs right here. Above it, we have a user guide, which is text-based, and it goes to their website, so you can sort of figure out how to do specific things. And then above that, we have our frequently used projects. Now, you probably won't have any here. These are just because I've made a lot of videos over time, and because of that, I've made a lot of projects. But when you do end up making your own projects, they will show up here as your most recently used. All right, so what we're going to start with up here is creating a new project. Now, before we do that, I want to make a quick note that I'm using Hitfilm Express 12. That just came out a few days ago. So if you're on a future version of Hitfilm, some of the things I'm about to show you may have changed. I don't know. I can't see the future, sadly. But anyway, let's get to making a new project. So here are our new project settings. We have the template that we can go for, and that will pretty much determine what kind of video you want to put into your project. I like using 1080p 60 FPS because I make a lot of gaming content, so it just makes sense for me. But they have a ton of different templates to choose from, and you can modify this yourself and then save it here so that you have whatever common size that you use, 900 by 650p. So taking a look at this, all of these settings are exactly how I'd like them to be. So we'll go to rendering. Most of these things you don't really need to change unless you know what they are. You can just leave them as they are and you should be good. So let's go to OK here, and that will create our new project. Here we are in the project. This is our workspace. This is what it looks like by default. If you for some reason don't have yours looking like this, you can come up here to View, click on that, go to Workspaces, and hit Editing. Now, there's a lot of different workspaces here that you can mess around with. This one and this one are custom workspaces that I made for myself to make my workflow a little bit smoother with the kinds of things that I did. You can save a workspace, delete a workspace, or reset a workspace if you very well feel like it. as well as go home to the edit screen, which we're on now, or to the export screen, which we'll get to at the end of the video. In addition, we can also change what panels are on and off. So the panels I'm talking about are like the effects, history, text, controls, media, all of those things are panels that you can turn on and off, aside from the text, the media, and a few other things. Hitfilm is a very highly customizable software, so I recommend you mess around with it for yourself to get your ideal workspace going on. So as you can see, there's a lot of things to go over here. Media, controls, trimmer, audio mixer, effects, history, text, and the editor, along with the viewer and the layer, which we're not really going to talk about in this video. We're going to go over each of these things step by step in this video so I can show you how you can use them to their efficiency. But let's start out by talking about the media tab. As you might imagine, this is where your media will go. So that means audio, video, images, all of that stuff will go into the media tab before it can go into the actual editor to be manipulated. The reason for this is primarily organization. You want to be able to see any media you're using in your project right here at any time, rather than having to go through 5 or 6 different folders to find all of the different pieces of information you're going to be using for your project. This is especially useful if you're working on a bunch of different things and you just have one giant folder with a ton of different, very vaguely named video clips. So here you can have everything you're working on right here, and you can see what it's for and when you're going to be using it at what point in the video. It's very easy to deal with. So now that I have explained to you what it does, let's go over how you can use the media panel. So I have a few folders open here. Let's say, for an example, I want to make this video about Minecraft and Shovel Knight. So I'll drag a few Shovel Knight videos into this media panel by just selecting them both and then dragging them in. Now for the Minecraft videos, I can do pretty much the same thing. I can drag a single video in if I want, or I can come up here to import, just click on that, and then find another clip that I'd like to use. Like perhaps this one right here, which is only 1 second long. So now I've added 2 Minecraft clips and 2 Shovel Knight clips. However, say I wanted to add like 5 of each of these, it would start to become a little hard to manage. I would have to scroll through them to find which ones I want. So an easy way to keep them organized is to come down here and click New Folder. Alternatively, you can right-click, hover over New, and hit Folder. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'll name this folder Shovel Knight. I'll create another one using this button here. And if you do that while the previous folder is selected, it will put it inside of it. But I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to create one separately and call it Minecraft. So now I'm going to go ahead, drag the Shovel Knight clips into the Shovel Knight folder, and the Minecraft clips into the Minecraft folder. So now we have our media sorted for video. Let's say I want audio too. Bits from the Minecraft soundtrack and the Shovel Knight soundtrack. I'll toss the Shovel Knight soundtrack in there, and then my Minecraft soundtrack. Now that takes up a bunch of space also, so I'll create a folder for all of them and just call it music. Now I can minimize that. And finally, let's say I might want some images. Now, these are just meaningless images that I've used for thumbnails and what have you, so I'll select 5 and just toss them in. And again, I'll create a new folder, and I'll name this one Images. I'll select all of my images and drag them in. Easy as that. Now, we only have a few things left in the media panel that we actually really have to look at. So we have the arrange by thing right here. So you have arrange by type and name, so that's type of media and the name of media. You have group by folder or media, and you have A to Z for alphabetical order, or Z to A. If we come up here, you can search for specific things if your media tab is really just that giant. Then above that, we have list mode, and we have preview mode. So what does this mean? Essentially, we can go to images, and we can see what all the images are. If we go to list mode, they just turn into little images. So it relies on you to know what they are. I like keeping mine in the preview mode so I can actually see them, because a lot of times that's how I differentiate clips from other ones. Because if we look at these Minecraft things, they have very, very generic names that would almost be impossible for you to figure out the identity of without looking at them. Now, let's come up here to the new button, because I'm sure that's been fascinating you. We have new composite shots and new planes. A plane is basically just a single colored piece of media that can be whatever shape in pixels that you want. It's, I suppose, just a mess around with layer. You can do a ton of stuff with them, and they're very useful for animations. How do you do animations, you may ask? For the most part, in composite shots, and that's the other thing you can make. Keep in mind, most of these things have hotkeys. We'll go over hotkeys more later, but generally it lists what they are right next to them, and it's good to learn these because it'll make your workflow a lot faster. Now, you may have noticed down here I have a composite shots folder, and I made that during a little seamless cut that I'm sure none of you noticed, and that's where composite shots would go, because composite shots are used to make individual animations. So if I create a new one here, it gives you the settings just like when you create a new project. You can hit OK, and it appears down here on the timeline, and you can mess with it. We're not going to talk about composite shots too much in the video, but what you should know is they appear in the Media tab, and then from there, you can just plop them into the editor and mess with them. So that's why I made a folder for composite shots. Now, if we come up here to import, we can click on this little arrow, and there's a ton of stuff we can import. Media, which is everything we've imported so far. An image sequence, which we don't have any of, and I've personally never used before, so I recommend looking that up if you're very interested in it. Installed templates, and that's a new thing they've added in this version of Hitfilm. I don't know much about it yet, but included with Hitfilm Express in the installed templates are a whole bunch of different lower thirds. And if you don't know what lower thirds are, they're basically little text animations that you can use to introduce your speaker in a video, or just to make some form of grand entrance. So you can add any of these as they are into the timeline, or import as a composite shot that you can edit even more. We're not going to really be messing with these right now, but I highly recommend that you do mess with them and have a lot of fun just kidding around and trying to find something cool that you can make with them. There's a lot to be learned from the different effects that they used in these, and just having them is a bit of a learning experience. Back to the import arrow here, we also have 3D animation stuff. So we're not going to be messing with 3D at all in this video, but it's there, and it's part of the media panel. So hooray! It's also worth noting that on pretty much all of these different things here, there's a little question mark in the corner, and that will bring you to Hitfilm's website page about whatever tool it is that you're looking at. So if you're having trouble with something, or if I didn't explain something clearly enough, click on that arrow and it'll open up the page for you to read about it. All right, so now let's talk about the editor. This is the most important part of the video editor. Why? Because it's the editor timeline. So pretty much anything you do is going to involve this. It's basically the linear sequence of the clips that you put in. So you could put a clip in here, and then another clip in front of it, and it would play from there to the other clip. So let's give you an actual example of this. I'll grab this video right here of Minecraft, and I'll grab myself a Shovel Knight video as well and slap that on the end. So as you could see, it was very, very simple just to put these in here. And you could call this a video just in and of itself if you didn't want to do any editing. You have clip 1 and then clip 2. So when you put the second clip in here, let's do that again so you can see exactly what happened. You can either just override the rest of the other clip that was there and cut it off midway, or I'll hit Control-Z to get rid of that. You can come right here on the end, and it will snap into place right at the end so that you don't accidentally overwrite anything, and you can have one clip flow to the other very easily. Now, if you wanted to just trim off a little bit of the end, you can zoom in really close here and unsnap it to take off just the tiniest amounts. But I don't want to do that. I just wanted to use this as an example so you could see it. Anyway, back to the editor here. You can see that we have video 1 and audio 1 here. These are the 2 tracks we have. Most of the time, though, 2 tracks ain't gonna cut it. Not nearly enough. On my average editing timeline, I have 5 video tracks and 6 audio tracks. So the way you can add more is by right-clicking here and hitting Insert Track. So you can do that again, and again, and again. So now I have 5 tracks right here, and I can scroll through them pretty freely, and you can add videos to each one of these. We can also come down here to the audio section, and I'll add a few audio tracks. Now, each one of these, if they're being used for something specific, like music, for example, you can rename them to what you want. I'm just rearranging them real quick because I care about that for whatever reason. But let's say audio 1, I want to be my voiceover. Audio 2 can be music. And audio 3 can be my sound effects. And then 4 and 5 can just be miscellaneous. So you might notice that you have to scroll through all of these to get to them. Now, that could be solved by just making the editor a lot taller like this, but now we can't really see anything else. So I'll squish this dude back down. And I think he was about this tall, something like that. I'll come down here to this small arrow, click on it, hover over video size, and I'm going to set it to small. Now, if you do small, it gets rid of the little thumbnails present in the video, but you also have a ton more room, and the thumbnails really aren't that useful, especially with this newest version of Hitfilm, because you can freely move through it pretty easily and see what's going on. We're going to do something similar for the audio, but we're just going to do medium so that I can still see the audio waveform and be able to tell sort of what happens where. Because when you have, say you're trying to sync a voice actor's mouth to his actual audio when you're recording with a camera and an external microphone, a lot of times what they'll do is clap or have that little snappy thing that they have at the beginning of movies. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but being able to see the waveform is important because that loud sound makes a spike in the waveforms and it makes it very easy to sync up audio. That's only one of the few reasons that it's a good idea to do this, but it's at least one good one. So I'd say keep your audio on medium. You can grab the middle here and scooch all your stuff up so you can see it all. And if we look down here, you can see we also have the master volume. Now this controls the volume of every single track for the audio. I don't use it very often, so I usually just leave it hidden like that, but you have the option if you want to. Now, let's take a look at this bar right here. You can do Control and scroll to look closer at different parts of the video on the timeline, and that changes this bar here. Or you can just grab it yourself and use that to zoom in. You can also click these little hills here to move in by an increment, but I hardly ever do that personally. A few more things to take note of here is right above the tracks, you have the time. You can click on that and see exactly what time in the video you're at. This stands for seconds, this stands for minutes, and this stands for hours. And this stands for frames. So because of that, there are 60 frames in 1 second. We're on the 51st frame of this second, since this is a 60 FPS video. So if I go to 60 right here by just typing it in, it'll move the playhead and go to 49 seconds exactly. You can also change this exactly, move 10 seconds very easily. This is really useful when you're trying to make exact edits at certain time points in the video or just skipping around in increments. So now if we look right to the left of that, right to the left. Excellent pun, didn't even mean to make it. We can see there's a whole bunch of tools here. The one you start out with is the selection tool. Now this can do most normal people things. You can grab your clip, you can move them around, up and down, side to side, and that stuff's all fine and good. Next, we have the drag tool. Now, that will drag you around the timeline, but you can't actually touch the clips with it. You might be able to select them, but you can't touch them. You just move around the timeline. Then we have one of the more useful tools, the slice tool. So this one, let's zoom out a little bit so you can get a good look at it. Basically, you can hover, click, and that slices the clip into 2 separate clips. If we want to click here, and then hit V, which will bring us back to our selection tool, we can just ripple delete this, and now it's gone. Alternatively, we could make special adjustments just to this bit of clip very easily now that it's completely separated from the rest of the video. And it is seamless. So if I just hit play from here, some success, you can't tell there's any edit right there. It's only useful for making edits to very select portions of the clip. Now I'm going to hit Control-Z to get rid of that because I don't need it cut. Also, the slice tool sort of snaps into position when you have something like the playhead here. So you can move the playhead to an exact location, like 20 seconds, cut there, and then move it to 30 seconds and cut there. That way, if you wanted to remove, like, for example, exactly 10 seconds of video or edit exactly 10 seconds of the video, you could, and it would be done pretty easily. Now, let me Control-Z that yet again, and I'll just go back to my selection tool. Now, the other ones here aren't as useful for your everyday use. I recommend you look up individual videos or on Hitfilm's website for what they do, because I'm not going over them in this video. But we do have the ripple edit tool. So what this essentially does is with the selection tool, you can like grab the end of a clip and pull it in, and it'll cut off that portion of the clip. But if you use the ripple edit tool, you can grab that end, pull it in, and it snaps the other one to it. So it saves you some time of having to go grab, drag in, grab, drag in. Instead, you can just do it in one fell swoop with a hotkey, which is R. Done. So the final thing I wanted to talk about is the rate stretch tool. So this is essentially to modify the speed of a clip pretty easily. The hotkey for this is S. So you hit S, it selects it, and you can grab the end of a clip and shorten it. But this doesn't cut off any of the clip. It merely makes it play faster. Beautiful. Since I don't want to sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks, I'm just going to go ahead and undo that again and go back to my selection tool. This is the one that you're going to use most of the time anyway. Now finally, over here, we have keyframes. And I'm not going to talk about these at all right now, because that's going to be much more relevant when we get to controls. So that's about it for the editor timeline. One final note, however, is if you click this gear right here, you can get to the project settings really easily. And down here, you can disable the snapping that I mentioned earlier by just clicking on this button. I like having it enabled, though. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. Over here, we have the export. You can do the in and out area or the contents, and that will move it to the export tab. We'll talk more about that later when we're at the end of the video talking about how you export things. All right, so we have a few final things that I'd like to touch on before we move on to talking about the trimmer. If you right-click on a clip, you can see there are a whole bunch of options here. I recommend you mess around with them, but there are just a couple that I really want to make note of here. We have remove, and that pretty much just deletes whatever clip it is from the timeline. You can hotkey that by clicking on something, then hitting the delete key on your keyboard. Also, we have ripple delete object. Now, that one I use a lot. I've even used it in this video, but it just comes so naturally to me that I didn't even think to mention it. That one's alt delete, and what it'll do is remove the object and move any clips ahead of it back to fill in that empty space. And finally, if you right-click on a clip, come up here and hit unlink, it will unlink the video from the audio so you can move them both independently and apply effects independently, etc. These are all really helpful things to do. I recommend that you just take a look at the rest of the things you can do here because there are some like this slice or make composite shot that are possible to do otherwise, but might be easier to do here. Oh, and one final thing, the speed/duration button. Click on that. You can set the speed of a clip in percentage and the duration. And the duration will change accordingly with the speed, as you can see. Or if you unlink them, you can change the speed but not the duration of the clip, and there will just be black area. All right, so that's all that I have to say about the editor, at least for now. So let's move on to the trimmer. Okay, so what exactly does the trimmer do? It trims clips. Let's go over how exactly it does that. So I'm going to be working with this clip here. Let's say I would like to import the section of the clip from here to like here into our timeline. So instead of dropping the entire clip in here, finding the area between those two spots, and going through all that trouble, what I'm going to do instead is just come right here, hit I. Alternatively, you could press this button right here. Then I'll come right here and either hit O or hit this button. Now we have set the in and out point for this clip in the trimmer. We can grab this clip and just drag it in, and it'll be the length that we specified. And if we want to grab later in the clip as well, we can hit in and out and drop it in here. It is really just that easy. You have a few buttons in here. You have move playhead to the start. That one's really easy. It just moves it to the start of the clip. You have previous frame and next frame, which for any timeline in this entire software, period and comma will be your next frame and previous frame, respectively. Over here, we can see the viewer settings for the trimmer. We have full resolution, the pause quality, paused resolution, and the playback quality. You can change those, and it'll change only how it plays back, not how it comes out in the final render. You can come here to change the scale of it. So that basically means like you can zoom in and out to like different locations in the clip. But if you do that, it can be hard to get it back in the exact position you want. So you just click here and hit scale to fit. Now we have a couple more buttons here that I want to check out. Let's zoom out here. I'll set the endpoint to be a little bit bigger. Now, if we hit insert clip, that will move the rest of the clips forward and insert this one we have right here into the mix. If we hit overlay, it will delete the clips that are already there to make our new clip fit. Over here, we can loop playback. And right up here, we have these buttons for use video or use audio. If we hit use audio, it'll show us the waveforms throughout the video. If we hit use video, it'll show us the video. So let's say for some reason you wanted only the audio or only the video from this. It doesn't really have to do with clicking on either of these buttons. All you have to do is hold Alt, click and drag to the video track, and then it's only video, or the audio track, and then it's only audio. Really simple. Now, if you want to mess with a different clip in the trimmer, all you need to do is select it in the media pool. Really, really simple stuff. Now, I know the editor took like 5 million years to go over, but that's pretty much all for the trimmer. Now we can move on to the viewer. So if you don't know what the viewer is for by now, I feel bad for you. It's pretty straightforward. This is where you view whatever content it is you're editing, but it can do some other things, so we're going to go over that starting from this side and going this way. First of all, you can scroll out or in to look closer or further away at certain things, but when you do that, you sort of lose your place. If you want to get back, all you have to do is hit scale to fit. Alternatively, they have a whole bunch of preset things right here that you can zoom to pretty easily, and we'll go over how you can look around more specifically if you like, but I like keeping it at scale to fit. Next, we have the playback quality. So we have full, half, and quarter for the resolution. Then we have playback quality, which I believe has to do with bitrate and stuff like that. I keep mine on draft. It looks perfectly fine. We have the paused resolution, which I keep on full, the paused quality, which I keep on final. We have the options. Show motion path, you want that enabled. We'll maybe talk a little bit about that later. Show effect controls, also you want that enabled. Background color, black is good. Checkerboard background, you'd like to click this on, and I'll show you what that does in a little bit here. Color channels, leave that how it is, but essentially what I can get from it is if you go to the red, green, or blue setting, it will highlight those colors on screen. Now, there are easier ways to do this, and probably better ways to do it, but they give you that ability. Then we have the Set Screen button, and essentially what this can do is set the viewer to full screen on another monitor. So I have 2 monitors, so I could set it to full screen on my other monitor. You guys wouldn't be able to see it, but it is actually quite useful if you have a secondary monitor and you just want that to have your viewer full screened, and that way you don't have to worry about like not seeing something on this tiny little square up here. It's not a problem. And then lastly, we have export frame. So if there's like a piece of the video you want for a thumbnail or anything like that, anytime you need an image from the video, you just hit export frame and it can save that specific frame as an image on your computer for you to use. Then if we come over here, we have next frame, play, previous frame, and move to start. So this is the same sort of stuff we had with the trimmer. Home moves it to the start of the video. Bam, like that. Period will go to the next frame, comma will go to the previous frame, and space will just press play or pause. If we keep going over here, we have set out point and set in point. These don't work like the trimmer does. This sets the in and out point for the entire editor timeline. So later, when we are exporting the clip, we have the option to export the content area. As we saw here, we can export the content area or the in and out area that we select. So you can use this up here to set that in and out area. If I were to hit O right now to set the out area, as you can see down here, this was grayed out because it's no longer in the in area. So I'll just hit Control Z so it goes back to how it was. Then right here on the end, we have loop playback, which you can get with Control L. And that just means when you're done watching it, it just plays back from the beginning all over again. Let's come up here now. We have 3 different tools to work with. We have the selection tool, the translate tool, and the text tool. So the selection tool is probably the one you're going to be using the most here. With the selection tool, you can click on whatever media it is that's on screen and select it and manipulate it. So you can drag around the media, and as you can see behind it, when we move the media out of the project area here, we have this checkerboard background. Why do we have a checkerboard background? Well, because I enabled it earlier. Essentially, what the checkerboard background lets you know is that there's nothing there. If the checkerboard background weren't enabled, we would just see black. Now, when you save the video, if there's checkerboard background there, it does not save looking like a checkerboard background. Instead, it will be black in the final product. It's pretty much just there for visual purposes only. Now, what else can we do? As I showed you, if you just grab and drag around the video, you can move it however you want. If you want to move it in specific directions, you can drag like this along the x-axis, I think it is. Here, you can drag it along the y-axis. If you grab this, you can rotate the video. If you grab this, you can move around the video just like you could by grabbing the whole thing. Now, let's look at the corners, what you can do. With this, you can change the shape of the video. Now, you can't really change it past a quadrilateral, so a rectangle or a square or anything like that, but you can shift it around to be squished to be taller instead of wider, or really wide and stuff like that. And if you want to change the size without changing the shape, you can hold Shift, grab the corner, and move it in. Now that prevents you from making it into a weird shape. It'll stay square as you manipulate it. Next, let's take a look at the translate tool, and you can get to that with the H key. Now, this, just like the translate tool over here, the drag tool, I should say, you don't actually really select or do anything with the video, you just move it around. So if you're zoomed in like really close like this and you needed to get a good look at this guy, it's pretty easy to do it that way. And finally, if I can scale it to fit real quick, let's take a look at the text tool. So this guy is pretty useful. It was just added as a feature with the editor in the newest update. If we click on screen, you can barely see there. There's a little flashing line, which means we can start typing. Also, down here on the editor, it created a text layer. So if we start typing, we have some text on screen right there. So how do we change and manipulate this text? Well, the text, first of all, has to be selected, so I'll hit Control A. And then we'll go over to the text tab down here. The text tab is very straightforward. It is only used for editing the text. So since the text is selected, we can change the font. I like using Agency FB. It is my favorite font to use. And we can change the size to make it really nice and big. We can change the space between the letters, which is really cool. We can add an outline if we want. But I don't want, so I'm going to unoutline that. Boop. We can change the line spacing if we had multiple lines here, like this. If they had bold for this font type, we could change it right here. We can also change the color for it right here, and the formatting for the paragraph down here. So that's pretty much everything we need to know about text for right now. Very nice that they added in this text feature. That was one of the things I covered in my Hitfilm wishlist video, and they got it excellently. So thank you, fxhome. Really cool. It's exactly what I wanted. All right, so now I'm just going to go ahead and delete this clip. I'm going to go to my selection tool and then just select it and hit delete. That's pretty much everything I had to say about the viewer, so now let's move on to controls. The Controls tab allows you to modify individual variables having to relate to some form of media. The way you can access these controls is by selecting said media, and then going to the Controls panel and clicking the drop-down for Transform. In here, we have a lot of different options to edit. Starting from the top, we have the anchor point, then the position, the scale, the rotation, then the opacity. These settings are specifically for the visual portion of a clip. If I were to select the audio, you can see that we don't even have the Transform tab here. All we have is Properties, where you can change the level in decibels. So we're going to focus on the visual aspect for a moment here. Now, most of these things you aren't going to be using on your primary clip. In some cases you will, but most of the time you'd probably be using this on something like an image. So I'm going to go ahead and take one of those and drop it right here in the beginning and just hover over it. Now, let's go back to Controls, open up that Transform tab, and start messing around and explaining things. These three are pretty straightforward: the position, scale, and rotation. The position allows you to change the X by dragging back and forth or putting in a specific number, and the Y by dragging back and forth or putting a specific number. Now, you may notice a theme here because that's how all of these work. As you change the number, you move the position of the clip. We have a similar thing going on with scale here. We can increase it past 100% to make the clip bigger, and we can shrink it down to make it smaller. If we want, we can change its size by unlinking the two variables for its scale and making it really wide, or really short, or really tall. Now, taking a look at rotation, we have a few ways that we can edit. We can grab this little wheel here and go to any degree rotation between 0 and 360. Now, each time we do this, this little X mark here goes up by 1. So that's how many rotations it's been through. Now, this isn't visible without keyframing, which we'll talk about later, but that's an entirely separate subject. But essentially, every time you rotate it 360 degrees, that makes a total of 1 rotation. So if that was 5 rotations, technically the clip has rotated 5 times completely, but you can't tell the difference because it hasn't been animated. Alternatively, you can just change on a smaller scale right here if you just want to rotate it a little bit. And down here we have the absolute rotation, so how much it has turned in total, including these full rotations here. So as you can see, with 45 rotations and 105 degrees, that's a total of 16,305 degrees rotated. We'll touch on how you can animate that a little bit later here. Now let's talk about opacity. Now that's not a word that you use very much in your everyday conversation. So essentially what it means is how not clear it is. If something's opaque, that means you can't see through it. So when it's at 100% opacity, it is completely solid. I'm going to turn the scale up here so we can see it a little better. Since this is at 100% opacity, like I said, we can see it clear as day, completely solid, and we can't see what's behind it at all. If we turn down the opacity, it is now less opaque, and therefore we can see through it some. Some of the background bleeds through. Now, I'm going to show you how to make a fade with this in a little while, after I finish explaining what the anchor point is and a little bit more about the Controls tab in general. So, what does the anchor point do? This is sort of a complicated question, but I'll try to explain it the best I can. Essentially, everything moves in relation to the anchor point. Since the anchor point is in the middle of the clip here, and the clip, or image in this case, rotates relative to the anchor point, when I change the rotation, and since the anchor point is in the middle of the image, it rotates from the middle. However, if I were to change the position of the anchor point by dragging it to the edge of this image, it will now rotate still relative to the anchor point. So instead of the clip rotating from in the middle right here, it rotates relative to the anchor point like that. Now, this can be used to accomplish a lot of different things. You can do the same thing with the scale here. If I grab the X variable for the scale, I can squish it in, and again, it squishes relative to the anchor point. So if you want to create different effects, you mess around with the anchor point to achieve different types of motion having to do with your clip. Now let's talk about what keyframing is, because I mentioned that a little bit earlier, and I also mentioned animation, and the two things are entirely related. So most of your keyframing would be done in composite shots, but I'll touch on it lightly here. Essentially what a keyframe is a point that tells the video editor what state the clip should be in at that point in time. So if we go to, let's say, just 10 frames in here, and let's turn on keyframing for the scale. So the way you do this is just by hitting this little button here. If you see a little button next to anything, you can pretty much count on the idea that you'll be able to keyframe it by just hitting that button. Now what that button does is it places a keyframe right where the playhead is on the clip. Then we can go a little bit further into the clip, let's say to 20 frames, and we can see we're no longer on a keyframe because this little bubble isn't lit up. But we can create a keyframe here, and the way I'll do that is by changing the scale variable here to, say, 241. So now I've made the two variables match here, and if we come back, we can see that we've animated it between those two frames. It's a very slight animation, so maybe I'll make it a little more advanced. I'm going to use the comma key to seek around to try and find where I put that keyframe. And now that I'm on it and it's selected, I can change it even more. So I'll just make it super tall. That way it's a more noticeable change. And now you can see we've done some very, very basic animation. So if you pay attention down here on the timeline, you can see we have a lot of different types of keyframes here. Now you may be saying to yourself, well, I can't actually see these keyframes on the timeline, so it's a bit confusing. One way you can actually look at the timeline to see them is by clicking this right here, the Display Timeline button. And then from there, it opens up a little miniature timeline where we can actually see our keyframes. So we can see one keyframe here and another keyframe here, and we can actually select them and mess around with them. And it moves the playhead on the timeline down here as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and squish the trimmer because we're done using it for now. And now we can see this little mini timeline here and work with it for a minute. The default keyframe type is this one right here, linear. So it's just straight from A to B with no fancy flares or whatever. I'm going to go over this keyframe type, this one, and this one very vaguely. You can look up other videos on keyframing if you want to know more, but this is essentially what I want to cover in this video just to get you up and running with very basic animations. So I'm going to select this keyframe right here, and we have the different types to choose from. So if we take a look at the different types of keyframes up here, we'll start out with the next one in line, and that is the constant keyframe. So it should be kept in mind the one that affects the animation from A to B is whatever the first keyframe in that order is. The last one will edit what comes ahead of it. So if I change this first keyframe to constant, what that essentially does is makes it so that the change between this and this is sudden. Instead of being animated per se, it just sort of pops into existence. The next one we're going to go over is the smooth keyframe. So as you might imagine, that makes it look a little bit more smooth. I'll just hit play so that you can see it. Good afternoon. Now that might be a little hard to see, so I'll move this keyframe down a bit so you can see the difference in smoothness. Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, that wasn't nearly as harsh as the initial linear keyframe was. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. I'm being too annoying. So now let's come back here. Smooth keyframe, as you might imagine, makes it a bit more smooth. Then we have the manual Bezier, or Bezier. I don't know how you're supposed to pronounce it, but this keyframe also is smooth in a different way than the smooth keyframe is. And another special little thing about this is when you have it selected, you can click this value graph button and actually modify how it works. I'm not really going to talk about how this modification works because I'm not qualified to do so. So I recommend you look up some videos on keyframing, since this is one of the most powerful tools you can have for 2D animation, and quite possibly 3D. Again, not something I've really messed around with. But by default, this does make for a very smooth transition. It starts out slow, speeds up, and then slows down again. You can sort of see that in the value graph's curve, especially if we change this second one to another manual Bezier. So it goes slow, then fast, then slow again. Cool, cool, cool. Now, by default, when you have keyframing enabled, whenever you change a value in here, it creates a new keyframe. However, another way you can create a new keyframe is by just hitting the toggle button right there. Now, if you don't want it, all you need to do is hover over a keyframe, make sure it's selected, and untoggle it. Remember, you can do pretty much all of this stuff on the normal timeline. It's just that you can't actually see the keyframe, so it can be a little bit harder to work with. If you know that they're there, however, you can still finagle your way to success. So now I've turned off the scale keyframes. We're not really going to be using that too much. Keep in mind, all of these different things can be keyframed and can be messed with, and I'm going to leave that up to you to do for yourself, but I want to show you a few practical things you can do with keyframing. We'll start with opacity. So a quick way to make a fade for a piece of media is to edit its opacity. So we'll turn on keyframes right at the beginning of this clip and set it to 0% opacity. That means it's completely clear. If this was the main clip, when it's completely clear, it would just be black behind it. So if you wanted your main clip to fade in, like this, that would be black in the final render. Now we'll come in like, let's say 15 frames in. I'll select this, and since the opacity is keyframed, we can just set it to 100%, and it will easily animate that opacity from here to here. So I'll go back to 15 frames in so that I can also do that for our main clip. So now I want a fade out for our image. Let's say that this image is, for some reason, my intro. And let's say I also want it to be 15 frames. So I'll come to the absolute last frame of it, and I'll go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Now, to create another keyframe, we can either hit the toggle button right here, or just drag it back and forth, and that'll create one. Then we'll go all the way to the end here, and drag it all the way down. And I just realized that I had the wrong clip selected there. Let this be a lesson to you. Always look up here by the Controls tab to see what the name of your clip is. I can just hit Control Z a couple times and make sure that I have the correct one selected now. And I'll just drag this back and forth and then come right here to the end and drag it to 0. So now we have a fade in for our video and our above image, and a fade out for our image. So there's just a couple things left that we have to take a quick note of with our Controls tab, and that is the clip properties. This allows you to change the blend mode, which we're not really going to talk about in this video. You can look it up on Hitfilm's website if you're super interested in what it does, and the motion blur. As you saw, we can animate things, and that means that we can give things motion. All this motion blur does is make it look more fancy when these things are in motion. If you want it for aesthetic appeal when you're animating your awesome 3D totally epic intros, go ahead and do it. But really, it's not something you have to worry too much about. Now we can finally move on to effects. And we have quite a lot of effects in here. As per usual, if you haven't gotten the general idea by now, I recommend you just play around with the different things you can do with these, but I'll go over a few that I use a lot. First, a quick note, we have these add-on effects. Now, you would think you can only use these if you've purchased the add-ons, but in this newest version of Hitfilm, you can slap these into your videos. It'll just add a watermark to them. Now, I don't think you can see the watermark right now, but it is there, right there in the bottom corner there. So if you don't want the watermark, don't use the add-ons without purchasing them. Whoopsie, accidentally removed the entire clip. So as you can see, since we added this effect, it actually appears up here in the Controls tab in the effects where you can modify it. I'm not going to be messing with this one though. Again, experiment for yourself. Instead, I'm going to search for a few effects that I use a lot. One of these is the fade. Now this is going to be in transitions, the fade to color effect. This one works as an alternative to the opacity fade that we did. Now it's not necessarily better though, because instead of fading via opacity, it fades to black. So if we were to use this on the end of our video here, it doesn't make it so that the video fades in opacity, although the video is fading in opacity. Image. The image is fading in opacity, but that's because of the effect we did earlier. Rather, it just makes it darker, as you can see. So that works for like the beginning of video. If we zoom out here and then come right here and slap it on the end of this by just dragging and dropping, we can see it brings our clip to black, and then we can put one on the other side and have a nice little transition. Swoosh. Alternatively, you can put it in between the two clips. Actually, I think there might be a tiny space. Yeah, there's a tiny space between them. So if we zoom back out, we can put it in between these two clips, and it'll fade to black, and then directly in with just the use of one. Now, there's a bunch of other transitions here. We even have some audio transitions, and I assume you can figure out what fade and crossfade for audio do. Again, mess around with it on your own. There's a lot of cool stuff to do here, but there are also other transitions with video, and I like to use those. Just look around, see what you like, see what you don't. Now, another absolutely great effect that I love to use, and this is mostly useful for when I have text or images on screen, is the drop shadow effect. So I'll just type drop. It's in the Generate tab. We'll put the drop shadow effect onto our T-Rex image, and you can barely see there's a little drop shadow right here, but you can come into the effects and edit it. It has different presets here, and as you can see, you can mess around with it quite a bit via these different presets, but you can also change these individual variables here, just like you could with the Transform tab, to get an effect that you like the most. Now, finally, once you're done editing whatever effect it is you're editing, you can right-click and hit Create Preset. Now, you can decide where to put this preset. You can name the preset Awesome Drop Shadow, and you can save the preset. Now if we go into our effects, scroll down, go to presets, we can see we have the awesome drop shadow preset to use in our clip. So we can just drag that into effects or directly on to the T-Rex clip here. And it is exactly as we set it before. So this is for when you use certain effects quite a bit and you just want something that will always be the same because that's what you like it to look like for your videos. I'm going to delete this preset because I don't plan on using it in the future, but there you go. There's a lot of cool stuff you can do with the effects here. They're all pretty straightforward. Drag it into the effects tab or drag it directly onto a clip and then mess with it in controls. You're welcome. Now let's move along to history. This one's super straightforward. It'll just take me a second to explain. Basically, the history of the things that you do in the timeline is stored here. So if you make a bunch of mistakes, you can go back quite a bit in the history to your entire session for this project and undo pretty much everything you've done if you want to. Or you can go back to a specific point if you feel the need to. It's a very helpful tab. I don't use it that often, but it's there and it's great. We're in the final stretch of this video, so I hope you guys are happy. It's 2:30 in the morning here, so I'm sort of trying to scoot through it. I hope you can understand that. Up here we have the audio mixer. Now that's by default next to the trimmer. What the audio mixer does is allow you to change the audio levels for specific tracks. So as you can see, we have the voiceover track, the music track, the sound effects track, audio 4 and audio 5, and then the master, which we touched on earlier. Each of these have a mute button, the ability to turn it to a solo track, the ability to keyframe the loudness, or this, which is the audio balance. So that means whether it be to the left or the right in your earphones where this audio is played, rather than dead center. Now you can use this to achieve various effects if you're trying to make films or whatever, but in general, you leave this as it is. Again, depends on what you're doing. Personally, I almost never touch it. And now let's scoot over here to the meters tab. This one is also pretty straightforward. If I turn this audio back up so that we can hear my beautiful voice again, and I hit play.
Afternoon, everybody.
You can see the meters appearing over here. Basically, what these tell you is how loud whatever audio it is that you're playing is. So if it's down here, that means it's really, really quiet. If it's all the way up here, it's way too loud and it's probably clipping and being distorted. If it's around here, that's about the comfortable spot for audio that you're going to want. Now, let's say that we have completed our video. It took a lot of effort, took a long time, but our video is done. We're ready to move on with our lives. So what do we do when we want to export it? Well, there are a few things we can do. We can come right here to the export button, export the contents or the in-out area, or we can hit Control-3. That'll bring us to the actual project screen. Alternatively, we could have come up to the view button up here and just clicked on export. Now, currently right here, we have the editor timeline as our only thing that we have the option to export. We also have something in here left from the last time I was editing a video in Hitfilm Express, so I'm just going to remove that finished task. But back up here with the editor, as you can see, that's the only thing here. However, if we had edited those composite shots that we had and made them into actual clips rather than just blank slates, those would also appear here for individual rendering. Seeing as that is not the case, I'm just going to go to our export tab and hit contents because I want to export the contents rather than the in and out in this case. Now that scoots it right down here, and we can change the preset that we want to render it with. Now we could have changed this preset ahead of time by coming over here and looking at the different rendering presets. YouTube 1080p HD is a pretty good one. I've also made my own. The way you would do that is by hitting New Preset, deciding the type of format you'd like to save it. I like MP4. Name your preset. Add a comment if you want to. I don't. Change whatever settings it is that you want to change, your bit rate, your aspect ratio, your FPS, etc., and then just hit OK. For this video, I'll use the YouTube 1080p HD. We can do that by clicking right here and selecting it right here. Now, if we want to change where this video will save to, because by default it is not your videos folder, all you have to do is open it up and then navigate to said videos folder and then name what you're going to name this file. So I'm going to name this file Hitfilm Express Render Test. I'll hit save, and now we can start exporting it if we'd like to. If you had other things you wanted to render, you could have added those to the queue as well down here. But seeing as I do not have those, I'm just going to hit Start Exporting. So over here in this little preview tab, once the render actually starts, because currently it says starting, we have the elapsed time and the start time. But now that it's started rendering, we can see the preview over here as it renders the frames. So we're just going to wait a little while for this video to finish rendering, and then I'll give my final thoughts to you guys, and we'll end this video. Actually, on second thought, I'm just going to talk straight through it. So, I really hope that you guys did enjoy this video. This took a long time to make. Over a week of pretty consistent work has gone into it, and I'm working on this literally the night before it's supposed to be uploaded. It's supposed to be uploaded at about like 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning, and as you can see, it is currently like 7 hours away. If you have any suggestions for future videos on Hitfilm that you'd like me to make, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you have any questions or concerns, again, leave them in the comments section down below. And if you enjoyed this video, you guessed it, leave it in the comments section down below. Anyway, thanks a ton for watching. I do hope that you guys did enjoy, and I guess I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.